Hello and welcome back to my channel. Today we have a special guest. His name is Sean Blackwell, and we were just talking moments before I hit record here. And this is a man that has some solid knowledge on the bipolar topic and things surrounding it, and somebody that I researched years ago and followed his material and thought, man, this is going to be an epic podcast, something that's going to be really valuable to a lot of people, including myself. So without further ado, Sean, if you'd like to continue an introduction for yourself, that'd be great.
Okay, yeah, Matt, thanks for having me. Matt said years ago he found my work. I was hospitalized for a manic episode in 1996, which was actually a very spiritual experience for me. And it turned out to be a very beneficial thing. My life got a lot better after it. I never had another episode. I never had to see a psychiatrist again after this short episode, but it was something, and we can talk about it a little bit in detail. But um, in 2013, I saw my nieces, my Brazilian nieces, and my wife's nieces here in São Paulo area, São Paulo, Brazil. They were having what was called, acute psychosis too. And at the time, I didn't know anything about bipolar disorder. I just thought that they had said that about me, that I could be bipolar or schizophrenia, um, or it could be a one-time thing. And for me, it was just like, well, you guys are totally off base. I had a spiritual experience, and it was. I know it was awkward and difficult, but it was very beneficial for me. And so in 2013, I started to really go deep on um, the relationship, the spiritual dimension of bipolar disorder, and the potential for healing if it's interpreted that way. And in my own path, I had already found the work of Stan Groff, who had this, he's a psychiatrist, Czech psychiatrist, and he had this concept of spiritual emergency, which basically said that, well, if you feel like you're going through something extremely spiritual and it's allowed to sort of carry through, that it can be a very beneficial experience. So I was like, well, that's what I had. I didn't have bipolar disorder, I had spiritual emergency. Um, but with my nieces, they were being labeled bipolar. So I spent, the next 4 months doing some initial research and discovering that it wasn't just Stan Groff, but there were other pioneering psychologists like Dr. R.D. Lang, Dr. Lauren Mosher, Dr. John Weir Perry, who had also seen psychosis as an attempt by the psyche to reorganize itself.
Okay.
And so based on their work, I started making videos on a YouTube channel called Bipolar or Waking Up. And I made, my first video was me telling my story under the title, Am I Bipolar or Waking Up? I went on to make a lot of videos on that subject. And then 2011, I wrote a book, published my book, my story about it, Am I Bipolar or Waking Up? And then, but still, there wasn't enough people just being helped by the videos. Some people were being helped, others were getting hospitalized again by being inspired by the work. And I thought that wasn't enough. And so then I started doing retreats for people based on some of Stan Groff's theoretical ideas and using a technique based on a theoretical technique of his called holotropic breathwork. I did a spin-off of that with these people in extended retreats, and I started doing retreats for the next 6 years, mostly in Europe, on private retreats, one client and myself, usually for about 10 days. They'd have supporters as well. And then last year, we'll get to it down the road, but last year I started to experiment with doing online work because I realized that there could be the potential for distance healing while I was on the retreats. So I started to test that out. And then just as COVID hit, that's when I was about to launch my online healing work. And I needed to wait a bit, but I started doing that. And so since COVID, I've been doing more online healing work, haven't been doing the retreats. And funny enough, that fit with me just fine because I felt after 6 years, I was a little bit tired of the retreats, and the online work has been going very well as well. So
Nice.
there's sort of a real synopsis of what I've been doing for the last 13 years. But I'm sure we'll backtrack and go through some the
Yeah,
details, some of the
most definitely.
details.
Right on. So I did read the book actually. I know that we had this scheduled and things came up for both of us that we had to reschedule, but I read it in a 2 day period, and
That's what I
as
like
I,
to hear.
right, I wanted to absorb.
People call me and they say, "I read your book in 2 days." I'm like, amazing.
That's awesome,
Uh,
right? Well, my wife's like, "What?" I was like, "Yeah, I just honed in on that and just absorbed every ounce of it, and it resonated heavily with my own story, and I've put that out there already on YouTube, but we'll touch base on that too as we're going along here. Um,
sure.
but yeah, if we could, let's go right back to the simple beginning of how this all came to be. For people who haven't read your book, if you could express to the audience um, just how this spiritual emergency began with you.
Okay, well, in my case, I guess it was 1997, 1996, because it happened around my 30th birthday, and I was born in 66, so 96. And I sort of had a perfect storm of triggers all come up. I've been extremely frustrated with my job to the point where I took a self-help course that was recommended to me by an ex-girlfriend to see if I could get to the root of why my career had been such an incredible struggle. I had been sort of a kind of a top of my class kid. I went to the University of Toronto. I kind of had big expectations for my career, but going into the working world, I felt a little strange. I didn't quite have a positive attitude for business. I saw a lot of social problems in the world and felt like I didn't want to become part of the problem. I didn't want to be part of the problem. But and I studied religion in school, which is not so great for getting a job. Sociology and religion, a little bit of economics too, and so I got a job in advertising because advertising was about ideas, but it's also part of the problem. And and so I was there for a few years, and I really wasn't getting anywhere, and I was kind of battling with on again, off again depression, and the job was just leaving me feeling deeply unsatisfied. So I took this course, and it was called the Landmark Forum. And on the course, it was very intense, and they had like 150 people in a room, and the course day was very long, like 8 a.m. until midnight. But just on the second day of the course, they did a meditation with us, where they asked us to get in touch with our fear. And during the meditation on fear, I didn't think I felt fear. I thought I was kind of fearless. And then a memory surfaced of a scuba diving accident I had had about 2 months earlier. And then, and in that accident, I could have died, um, but I didn't. And all the fear of that moment, because if you're afraid scuba diving, you will die, because you'll stop breathing, the air expands in your lungs, and you get a brain embolism, and you can
That's
die
right.
right away. So I just was continually relaxing and exhaling, and sort of left the fearful energies to the side. But I didn't realize that I had been traumatized by doing that, even though it saved my life. And and so then all the fear came up in this meditation, and then and it came with a punch in the chest. It was like it was a punch in the chest, and then this fear came out, and I started crying, and I realized I felt fear, and I was shaking, and this energy was really strong, especially around the heart. And then when that whole thing was over, my senses had sharpened. I could see detail in curtains. I could see that I couldn't see before. I could smell things that things were everything was sharper. Um, and I was very kind of high, I was feeling high, and went home and I started talking to my mother about issues in our family relationships and my relationship with her, and wasn't sleeping. And I'm writing in notebooks till 4 in the morning, And then by the time the course was over, which was like 3 days later, it was a 5-day course. But on the last day of the course, my senses were still heightened. And I came to the realization that I had died during that scuba diving accident. And and this was all purgatory. And so I was going to meet God or go to Nirvana or whatever. And that led to me going into a neighboring hotel ballroom, because we were in a hotel, and I thought I was going to meet God. Took my clothes off, peed on the carpet, because I thought I needed to let go of everything, including my fear of peeing on the carpet in a hotel. And
That's pretty wild.
eventually, yeah, yeah, and eventually, make a long story short, eventually the police came and got me in a stretcher and took me to the hospital. And I still, even at the hospital, strapped to the hospital bed, I still thought I was traveling through. I thought I was traveling through space and time, and that the hospital was actually a giant spaceship floating through the universe, and that we were going to heaven. That's
Wow.
kind of where it went. Yeah.
Okay. I've got something similar too, and I'll touch base on that with my story and collaboration. Mine happened around the year of '99, I believe, and I was out in Calgary at that time. Raised in Scotia, born in Dryden, Ontario, but traveled abroad just to get a culture change, I guess, from a small mentality town like I'm growing up in. Um, and I was experimenting with a lot of drugs. I mean, being young,
Hmm.
19, I wanted to, fit in with the rest of the gang, trying all kinds of shit, mushrooms, psychedelic stuff, and whatnot. And I came to that realization too, out of nowhere. The sensitivity to anything and everything, the alertness, the clarity, it was just bizarre. And I couldn't really understand it or put it into words or express to someone else. It was just an emotional feeling, I guess. And that's something Eckhart Tolle spoke of in his book, In the Power of Now, when he was going through that transformation that he had to, endure too. Everything became bright. It's almost like there was a change in the mentality, your perspective of your external just abruptly switched and did a 180. And I also found myself in that situation, naked, running the streets, thinking that I was going to heaven, praying steadily, seeing people who I thought passed on was there visibly talking with me. Um, and I obviously got strapped to a stretcher and taken off too. But when the police were taking me to the police headquarters there, I thought I was being arranged in some type of, I don't know, it seemed like it was a wrestling match. I don't know where my thinking was, how this all came to be, but it was just a strudel of ideas tossed together, and I was questioning all kinds of shit. But on this pedestal of contentment, that happiness I've never ever felt in my life. And, I ended up waking up in a hospital, totally drugged, and then having patients that were telling me what I was doing, bizarre stuff for the duration that I was in there. I think 4 or 5 months. It's pretty extensive.
Wow.
Yeah, and they couldn't figure out what was wrong. They didn't know if I had bipolar, schizophrenia. I had my mother back home in Scotia telling the doctors out there that, they should try me on lithium based on her research, whatever the hell that means, right?
Hmm.
So they did, and my psychiatrist at that point said, "This is the worst case I've seen in my all my years of practice." And I thought, "Wow, that's something else. Quite a title, right?"
Wow.
Yeah, I was ripping off um, the plexiglass panels that they had over the drywall in the room. I scared the whole staff, all the patients. They were just freaked out by me, right? And I remember urinating in the corner, as you did, thinking I got to release everything, just bare bones. I'm going up home to heaven or whatever this is, right? And I remember um, shitting in the corner of the room and like slinging that to the wall, right? And screaming like these belly aching screams, let me out of here, and whatever else I was saying, God only knows. But um, eventually they released me and told me, I was going to have to stay on this medication regimen for the rest of my life, be prompt with the appointments with psychiatrists, and just try to run a stress-free life somehow, some way, right?
Mm.
And long story short, after 20 years of the medication at a high dose of lithium, I believe I was at 1,350 milligrams before I tapered off and discontinued. But I had something called nephrogenic diabetes insipidus, which is when your
Mm.
kidneys can't filter the waste and they're wanting
Oh.
to shut down from the toxicity levels, right?
Wow.
And in the course of my tapering prior to that, for a good year, I was going to emerge steadily with my wife, going in to see my family doctor. They thought I might have had cancer, Lyme disease, running a battery of tests, couldn't figure out anything, and they just sent me on my merry way. And the last going off, I was hospitalized. I shouldn't say hospitalized, it sounds horrible, but I was taken by paramedics because I had a pressure of 192 over, I think, 90 odd. And I couldn't feel my extremities. Lower body went numb. And to those coming weeks before that day that I was taken by the ambulance, I was suffering tremendously with blackouts, not being able to voice as I normally would, the clarity of mind. Everything was scrambled. I couldn't breathe properly, gasping for air, sweating profusely. This is my body's way of detoxing from the toxicity levels of the lithium, Abilify, and all the other crap that was, gummed up.
You think the blackouts were a withdrawal symptom?
Quite possibly. Because I started off with a 10%, and I had quite a stretch to go with only 10% tapering every month. And I finally went into the hospital, by ambulance, and I think I sat in there for 2 hours before my heart rate, regulated, and they said, okay, you can go home, but feel free to come back. Don't hesitate if something comes up again. And I said, holy shit, this is a total waste of time. I've been doing this for so long, and it's exhausting. We don't have a tank of energy already. So you're in and out, and trying to express your story to nurses and doctors alike, and it feels like it's just mundane repetition, that you're not making progress, you're not getting any headway, and you're just told to continue your pills and do what you're supposed to, right? Yeah. And I went home the last day after that incident, and I said to my wife, I was typing on the computer 10, 12 hours trying to research what the hell was going on with me, how I could correct it on my own, because I wasn't getting any answers from doctors. And I said, at this rate, honey, I want a gun. I'm about to blow my head off. I can't tolerate this anymore. I've endured this for so long, and this is the home stretch of torment to hell. And I was viewing something on YouTube, and they always have that rabbit hole column on the right-hand side that, you get cast on, right?
Sure.
And it was something about turmeric, this concoction, turmeric drink. And I was like, okay, I've touched base on every, self-help ailment out there that could provide me some, comfort, and nothing's worked. And I was trying to change my diet anyways, with the lithium. I was a heavy drinker, mostly when I lost my brother, Dan, 6 years ago. I figured, in order to fill this void, I got to dump something in there, just to numb myself. So I chose to drink a lot. That probably, progressed things and accelerated at a faster rate naturally. But anyways, I found this video, and he was expressing about arteries that harden from our diet and the stressful lives that we lead and so forth. And I said, shit, man, I've got nothing to lose at this rate. Why don't I try this? So it was a whole lemon, the rind included, turmeric, black pepper to make the turmeric bind, which he doesn't mention in the video. I researched that myself. Otherwise, it's useless. Clove of garlic, thumb-sized ginger, apple cider vinegar if you have a preference for it. But all of these are anti-inflammatory properties, and that can release that tension that you have in your arteries and cleanse them.
Okay.
So I got on that, and within a 4-day stint, he expresses it in the video. I can post that in the link below too for others, about how well you're going to feel afterwards, because your body's totally purging. And I remember having a bowel movement, and it's just like the demons came out, right?
Wow.
I was like, this is freaking nuts. I was a heavy boxer, heavy drinker, landscaped my whole life, totally broken inside and out. And after 4 days of this, I was able to go back to a job, go back to boxing, not automatically, but within probably a month's time or whatnot. And I thanked the man on the video. I didn't get a response from him because he's quite busy, I guess. But if it wasn't for that, I wouldn't be on this road to recovery, to be honest. And when I went to see doctors about my health concerns afterwards, doing a stress test for my heart and whatnot, they said, what the hell are you doing, Matt? You look great, So I told them what I was doing, and they said, "Well, where'd you learn that?" You know, because the doctors don't know anything about nutrition. That's not what they're taught,
Mhm,
right?
mhm.
That's very unfortunate. So, you know, they said, Matt, you passed the stress test with flying colors. Typically, we have old people here, but you know, like you're off the charts. We haven't had somebody, you know, so finely tuned. And I was like, well, I owe it all to that video and just trekking off from that. I just kept going and digging further and further. And I came across the naturopath through an acupuncturist who I met in Bridgewater. Her name is Carol. She's a godsend. She's awesome, right? But Angela, man, is my go-to individual when I'm questioning something and I don't have clarity on it, and she just fills in the gaps. And she's the one that said about doing this YouTube. You know, have a platform so you can express yourself to others,
Mm.
help them navigate through the difficult times, and you know, so they don't have to endure so much, because it is quite tough, as you know yourself. Back in our day, with our sufferings and our psychosis, diagnosings, and everything else, there was minimal information to run with besides what the doctors were giving you. Um, I even think
Mhm.
for a good 15 years or more, I wasn't able to find someone else who went through the same, whether it be YouTube videos, in person. But there's always that constant similarity that everybody who's endured this psychosis has felt like they were, you know, Jesus Christ or the second coming of, or initiated with something to that nature. And it wasn't
Mhm.
everybody having a religious background. So I don't know about you, Sean, if you have some clarity on that matter, like why that may be for each and every individual who's been diagnosed.
Yeah, and I've been in touch with a lot of former atheists or agnostics who've had the spiritual experience as well, and they're not atheists anymore. Once you've had direct experience, then it's a whole different thing, you know.
Right.
Um, but I think that all of what we think of as mental illness is happening in a bioenergetic dimension. Basically, you could call it the chakra system or Kundalini system. You could call it the soul, you know.
Yeah.
So I think that the whole nature of what we think of mental disorders is basically spiritual in nature. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's a positive thing in your life. I mean, it can break either way. And, you know, even from the first get go, I mean, you were in the hospital 4 or 5 months. Um, you were violent. You know, the staff was very concerned about you. You know, I was in and out in 4 days.
Oh wow.
It was a very and they even I think they released me after 48 hours during the day into my parents' care. So
That's
I was
right.
very lucky. You know, I was very lucky that way. And then I was out of the system. As soon as I went out, I never went back. You know,
Nice.
so part of my research was, you know, navigating the gap between like my experience and yours, you know, and then the experiences of other people who actually have very disturbing experiences full of paranoia, more violence, voices that tell them to do terrible things, you know. So I kind of had to make sense of that whole spectrum, you know, and that's why at this point I'm not nearly as anti-psychiatry as I was when I started, you know, because I had my resentments about how I was treated in the hospital. You know,
Definitely.
I was forcibly injected while I was handcuffed to a bed. You know,
Same.
so
Yeah.
that's tough. You know, it feels like rape, to be quite honest.
It does. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
But as I've been in the work and seen, I've seen that I do think there are some people who might be better suited to being medicated for the rest of their life. But I think the bigger thing is that there's a huge group of people somewhere in the middle who can improve, who can get better, and who can, you know, go off medications if they've got the right support, resources, and do deep enough work.
That's it. And I found too that reading a book by Gaber Mate, I'm a big
Mhm.
fan of his too. I believe it was called "The Body Keeps a Score," or "When the Body Says No." There's also a
No, but I think it was a Dutch guy who wrote The Body Keeps Score.
yes, that's Bessel van der Kolk. There we are.
Yeah, yeah.
So I've read both books. That's why I'm crossing them together. But um, Gaber Mate, um, he's expressing about childhood traumas or just traumas that have been suppressed for so long. They get lodged in your body, in your mind, and maybe that is nothing more than your body's necessity in needing to release that. You know,
Yeah.
it's much like when somebody who gets bummed out or depressed or angered, they want to numb themselves, so they redirect themselves to a source like, you know, booze or drugs or gambling or whatever it may be. We always have to go for advice because we don't want to face that, right? So that's the whole project here for me, is to do the inner work, the shadow work that's necessary to prevent that from coming up the way it did. And now that the mind has been developed over the years, I mean, being that young, I didn't have a clue about what was happening, right?
Yeah, my
So,
episode happened at 30. I had a lot more
really?
maturity than you at
Oh
19,
shit, yeah.
So I could have a bit of distance from what was going on around me, whereas you couldn't.
No, exactly. And I believe coming from a small town going into, to me, what seemed like a big city of Calgary, the
Okay.
culture change and just not finding my footing, my place, and my role in the world.
Okay.
It was just, well, it started as a depression and then doing
It
more and more
always
drugs.
does.
Well, yeah, right. And I'm still kind of baffled by the whole procedure of it. Still trying to find clarity on what really truly went wrong, right? If we want to phrase it that way. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I, just as an aside, I know a lot of the people I've worked with, we're dealing with uh, blocked childhood memories. Like they don't remember big chunks of their childhood, and and I've had a number of clients who've called me months later or a year later, and they've had memories of sex abuse surface,
Wow.
you know, months later, you know.
Yeah.
So the whole thing about repressed, blocked memories and child abuse and sex abuse being at the root of these disorders is very true, and not all. There's, for example, emotional repression can be enough to lead you into a bipolar situation. But there's good research on it now, and to give you an idea, John Reed. Well, John Reed is a leading thinker on this, but there was some research out of Australia that said that if you've been sexually penetrated by more than one adult before the age of 10, now, so you can imagine how sick that would be, a life for a
Yeah.
person, right? To be raped
Exactly.
by more than one adult before the age of 10, your chances of ending up with schizophrenia multiply by 50.
Wow. Makes
It's
sense though.
almost it's almost as if you're sexually abused before the age of 10, a mental disorder is inevitable.
Wow. Well, that's another way of your body trying to cope, your mind and body. It's kind
Yeah,
of like,
yeah,
you
it's a
know,
coping strategy.
well, exactly. Much like when you get punched, let's say, for an example, you get punched, you get knocked out. That's your body's mechanism to protect itself, shutting all systems down, and then so that you can recoup and regenerate. And I believe that's probably what's happening with individuals, like you mentioned, not maybe all sexually abused individuals, but people who've suppressed a lot of trauma, right, from childhood. I mean, you think about it too, the stresses of life in general. It's much worse for our kids now than it was for us growing up, I believe. And that's why we have the high stats of the extra diagnosings and the, definitions for this, that, and everything else, right? I mean, shit, ADHD is on the rise tenfold. But what I'm trying to incorporate in my son's life now, he's 14. He's got a slight interest, but not fully indulged in it, naturally, because maybe it's the age. But I talk to him about Qigong, meditation, being one with nature, immersing yourself in those elements so that it gives you that protective bearing and armor to guide you in life. Because really, what is there but technology? And I don't mean like you can't use it as a tool to aid you in whatever, but simply put, there's many hours spent on devices all
Yeah.
day long. We're so disconnected. The indigenous people had it right all along, right? And from what I've read in my research, my understanding of mental illness could be, not guarantee, but could be a way of connecting with the spirit world for unfinished business that they might have wanted to reconnect with the living to finalize things that they weren't able to when they were here with us, right? So
Mhm.
could it not be a shamanic like healing ability, or is it something
Yeah,
totally separate?
yeah, in my case, for example, if you look at everything that led up to my acute psychosis, um, I think it was meant to be.
Mm.
I think it was somehow kind of written already. You know what I mean? So I'm quite philosophical in my own experience. But at the same time, I can't deny that, um, you know, trauma did surface for me. And I think that, um, how do I put it? I don't get into too much conjecture about what's going on exactly. But what I do is I encourage people to take up a healing path. Like you said, shadow work, working a shadow. Forget about enlightenment. Just work on that shadow, bring up the pain. And whether you've got bipolar disorder or any other disorder, or whether you're completely normal, you know, work on that pain. And if you can work on the pain, you'll make progress, you
Yeah,
know,
that's what I found
regardless
too.
of where you are.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's even been a big turnover for me in the 3 year period that I've been working with this, right? Um, Quite lazy was the attitude prior to all that. I just
Mhm.
thought, I'll work out, I'll eat healthy, and then I'll drink, right? When things become
Mm.
too absurd. And the whole time being heavily medicated, that's really hard on your body, right? Especially with lithium. Yeah. Um, there was one other gentleman that I've reached out to. I haven't got anything in response yet, but he's gone through the same. I can't remember his name now. He's got a Facebook page. It seems to be quite inactive these days, but he also was on the lithium drug for 20 plus years too. And I really like to touch base with him to see, how he's doing now. From what I've seen on his Facebook, I think it was probably inactive for at least the last 5 years, right? But just to get an understanding from someone else's point of view. This is the whole idea here, right? To have someone's story, to collaborate ideas, thoughts on the matter, right? Rather than, the books have been drummed up and written for the doctors to throw at us like Bibles, right? Yeah.
Yeah. I'm a little bit different. I understand what you're saying, and mostly I agree. But I would say that in the alternative to psychiatry kind of movement, because there is a sort of mad pride movement out there looking at alternatives, I think the appreciation or focus on different perspectives eventually gets in the way, because if you're so open to taking in multiple perspectives all the time, it can hold you back from taking decisive action, you
That's a
know?
good point.
And so, for example, I think in the anti-psychiatry movement, people are hesitant to say a couple of things that I'm very decisive about. One, this is happening in a spiritual dimension. Whoa, we don't want to bring religion into this whole thing. I'm not talking about religion. I'm just
That's right.
talking about another dimension of human living, regardless of your beliefs. And then the second is, and we got to work on the trauma. Whoa, who are you to say that this isn't my personality? Like, hey, can't I just be different? I've just got a convergent, I've got convergent or divergent neuroreceptors. I'm different. Respect my difference. It's like, okay, I respect your difference, but if you want to heal, you're gonna need to work on your trauma, and
That's
that's
right.
it.
That's right.
You know. And so I'm a little bit of a fascist when it comes to how to deal with disorders. It's like, this is where I stand. If you want to work with me, call me. If you don't, if
Yes.
you want to do something else, that's cool. You can go your own way.
Yeah.
But this is what I do. That's what I
No, I
do.
like that point of view, actually, and that makes sense too. And I've heard something similar, and I'll touch base with that on the religious
Mm-hmm.
side. I've always dipped my toes in religion, but never felt like I was anything but able to sit on a fence, perched up there, wondering which way to, direct myself. And I've had somebody say something similar, like if you don't find your footing in something, you're never going to be a part of anything. And I'm okay
Yeah.
with that in terms of religion. But with this whole bipolar thing, having a really deep understanding and concept of what this is and how to work with it. And I think the idea is simply what works for that individual, right? So
Mm-hmm.
I'm still in the baby steps, but
Mm-hmm.
that's my purpose and my mission in life right now is to get to the bottom of this, to heal myself so I can help heal others. But yeah, you definitely need a starting point. Otherwise,
Mm-hmm.
it's, just an ongoing, never-ending cycle.
Yeah, and with that said, I think that the anti-psychiatry movement, Mad Pride, has been really good about peer support. The peer support movement is growing in the U.S. and it's great, and I think for the most part, that's all that most people with a diagnosis are ready for, because to face the pain is very difficult.
Yeah,
It's very difficult, and the the disorder itself is a defense mechanism. You know, you're protecting yourself from something that happened that was so painful that your psyche decided you're not going to feel that, right? So to ask this person to come back into contact with all this kind of pain, it's a lot.
it is, definitely.
It's a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's difficult to revisit those, even if they're locked away, you know. Um,
Mm.
you're aware of it without being aware. But yeah. Um, so you said a 4-day stint was all you had. So were you medicated
Yeah.
besides the injection? Did they try to get you on something when they
I,
released you, or
I think I was on sedatives.
okay?
Just something to relax me. Probably benzos or something. I didn't really feel a strong reaction to the medications the way other people do. They asked me to take them. I said, okay, I'll take them, but they're not going to do anything. And then I slept a lot. And then I was out of there.
Hmm.
So I don't consider, like there's a whole psychiatric survivors movement, in Mad Pride. And a lot of those people have been really harmed by the whole system.
Oh,
And
definitely.
I wasn't particularly harmed by the system. I was, yeah, a little bit traumatized, but I got away from it before I could really internalize,
Hmm.
like thinking of yourself as having a broken brain, for example, or
Yeah,
not being seen as a human being. I mean, that didn't really happen to me, you know. But
which
it but
is
it put me in a unique position where I could go out and do work with another perspective that people who've had deeper disorders really weren't ready to go for.
makes sense. Yeah, and I can value that. It definitely traumatized my ass. 20 years
Mm-hmm.
worth, and not hearing anything but negativity. Like,
Mm-hmm.
especially being this sole individual without having a network of people, this we could sit and chat about this. You're just left alone with it and trying to go through the hurdles of life, navigate as normal people do. Um, I was quite taken back by it. Um, but I'm still standing and fighting this. That saying, it, medication can be there and used as a guide to band-aid, but it definitely shouldn't be in place long term because of the nasty side effects. And I can project that in volume simply because what I endured going through that. And I'm certain that anyone else who had to be on a lithium dose of that nature and that magnitude for 20 years, there's definitely going to be some nasty side effects, right? Um, I really don't believe that you can base things on blood work and bullshit like that to put you in a perfect box column to match other participants going through the same thing. Um, yeah, so for me, for 20 years, it felt like they took what I could have been, and now I'm reliving, almost like being reborn and starting all over again. I'm okay with that because there's no growth without suffering, and that was immense suffering for 20 years plus. Um, so yeah, I can definitely say it was a benefit, but a curse at the same time, a double-edged sword. Like
Sure.
yeah. Um, so I've read your book, right? I've watched your videos. Um, could you elaborate a little more on the retreats that you were, um, you know, uh, running before all this COVID stuff started? Yeah.
Yeah, sure. Well, there's a technique that Stan Groff developed called holotropic breathwork. And the word holotropic means moving towards wholeness. And the idea with holotropic breath work is that, and by the way, nobody should be doing this without a certified holotropic breathwork facilitator. And in fact, if you don't have a holotropic breathwork facilitator, it's a trademark technique, so you're not doing holotropic breathwork. You can't, and you really can't do it on your own, because the most important thing about this breathwork approach is the setting. Once the setting is in place, and that's what Stan Grof has arranged, okay, then once you've got that, then the powerful experiences could come forward. And the idea is that we've got, with this holotropic breath work, is that we've got trauma and sort of bioenergetic blockages, and that with over breathing, with something like voluntary hyperventilation, when combined with powerful music, okay, emotionally evocative and powerful music, and facilitators who know what you're doing and know what you're going through, okay, if you put all of that together in a safe space, then deep unconscious material can surface, okay? The same material that would surface in a psychosis, okay? For example, you might have an issue with your mother that just bursts open while you're in psychosis. Well, that could burst open while you're in holotropic breathwork state. So the idea basically is you'll do some strong overbreathing, maybe like nothing fancy, your own technique, like your own style, what's comfortable. And then within about 20 minutes, a normal person will probably go into a mild non-ordinary state. And then once you're in that state, your intuition will be guiding you to want to express what's going on. And so then you're encouraged to move with the music and with your intuition, to vocalize any way you want. You just stay on a yoga mat to do this. And sometimes extreme stress can come up, tremors can come up, people can, have birth regressions come up that facilitators need to take them through. But the whole process is unguided. The facilitator doesn't guide the process at all, but they're there to facilitate and support whatever comes up. So I'm a certified Grof facilitator, got my certification with that organization, Grof Transpersonal Training, in 2018, 2016, I can't remember.
16, I believe, what I read, yeah.
Yeah, okay,
Yeah.
2016?
Yeah.
Yeah. And then, but it was contraindicated for people with bipolar disorder because there was a fear that in a typical group setting of 3 hours, that it wasn't safe enough in case bigger experiences came up, and it could be very disturbing for the whole group. So there were very few facilitators working with people with bipolar disorder. There was also a certain bias within this sort of transpersonal psychology community, which did see mental illness as different from spiritual experiences, which I was challenging. So I said to myself, what happens if we put people on retreat, and do this on retreat? And so I called up a big fan of my work, a woman out of Romania, asked her if she'd like to work with me. This was in 2013. And she said, yeah, and my first retreat was just me and her for 3 weeks, 21 days.
Wow.
And the first 2 weeks was for the work, and the whole last week was in case she went into psychosis, I wanted to have a week to see if I could get her back before we needed to hospitalize her. Because I didn't know if the work that I was doing would actually create a psychosis.
Yeah, makes sense.
And that had been a fear at the time. But it didn't, and the more I learned to work with it, the more I realized it was extremely safe. I just needed to modify it. I called it bipolar breath work. And when I would tell these Grof facilitators that I was doing my bipolar breath work with clients every day of a 10-day retreat, their jaws would just drop. They couldn't believe it, because even in your training as a Grof facilitator, you're doing 2 3-hour sessions in a week period, so 6 hours, and then I'm doing like 20 hours with people who are contraindicated, and that was just a start, so that's really where things went. And we saw rapid progress. We saw people making significant progress, and one person in particular, my second client, Monica Kettler, she went off her medications right after her first retreat.
Did she taper, or did she just abruptly stop?
She abruptly stopped one medication.
Okay.
She was diagnosed as cyclomania, and she abruptly stopped one medication, and then she tapered for 3 months off the other.
Okay.
And then she was off her meds for a year. She looked like she was going manic the following year, but we did a second retreat. And then after that second retreat, which was also, I think, a 10-day or 7 to 10 day thing, her psychiatrist released her and said, you know what, you don't have your disorder anymore. Whatever you did worked. And it's
Wow.
better for you to stop seeing me because under German law, if you haven't seen your psychiatrist for 5 years and nothing's happened, then you don't have a disorder.
Really?
Okay. Yeah.
That's
And
interesting.
now she is she's just past the 5 year mark of being symptom free and medication free for 5 years. So she'll be getting that certification, and she's already a alternative therapist. She's got a license
Nice.
as an alternative therapist working in Germany.
That's
And
awesome.
sometimes I refer European clients to her. Yeah.
Swell.
Yeah.
Now, see, I heard about the holotropic breathing only as of recent, several months
Mhm.
ago, with a naturopathic acupuncturist, and she
And
said,
it's
"Matt,
widely misunderstood. It
it
is
is right.
widely misunderstood. Yeah.
Yeah, she did it herself and expressed her story to me, and I thought it'd be quite interesting because I'm willing to be challenged by anything to get over this hump and get on with it
Hmm.
already, right? You know,
Hmm.
I want to be a trailblazer and just dive right in. And she said it's quite expensive, but in my area there is somebody, 30, 40 kilometers away that could perform that. And as you mentioned, it's something that you don't want to do on your own because you don't have a safe place, or maybe you're not comfortable with the surroundings you have anyways, with your family members. How are you going to react to
Yeah.
something of that
But
nature, right?
you can hurt yourself because you can be taken into a state where you want to um, bang your hands against the floor, like punch the floor. And for example, your pain receptors in a holotropic state will diminish. So you could be punched like so there was a situation I know of a guy, even I think this was a facilitated group where a guy broke his hand, because he was
Jeez.
punching and he was punching a mattress. The mattress just wasn't thick enough.
Hmm.
I've had the sensation of wanting to grind my skull against a cement wall. And the
Really?
facilitator came over and he was like, Sean, I can't let you do that. You could hurt yourself. And I said, but I need the grind. You don't understand. I need the grind. And he said, I'm sorry. And then I was like, well, I need the grind. I was pretty pissed
See,
off.
well, I imagine, but that's interesting too. You mentioned about the receptors being, dumbed down, so to speak.
Yeah.
I
During that
recall,
state. Yeah.
well, yeah, in the state of psychosis, if that's what we want to call it, I recall being on a sea train. Like I have vivid memories, but they come and go, like a light switch, right?
Uh-huh.
There's a lot of gaps in between that ordeal. But I do recall specifically sitting on a sea train platform with my legs crossed, almost in meditation form, and I just started smashing the concrete with my knuckles, and I couldn't feel shit. I just remember a guy walking in front of me said, "Buddy, man, like you're gonna break your hands." I'm like, "No, I'm fine," and I kept smashing them, and they're all bloody, busted up, but I couldn't feel an ounce of pain, and I think that's why I was able to become so animalistic. It's like that bug juice strength you get, when your body and mind and soul has just had enough. You just exert all that energy uh, to get rid of that pain, I guess, right? It's like a boiling pot of water. So,
Did you break anything? Did you fracture anything with what you did, or did you just cut it
nope,
and bruise
just
it?
yeah, just cut and bruised, right? But same with the drywall. Like I shredded that room that I was encased in right to the bare bones, right to the studs, and they're like, "What the fuck is this guy on?" Right? They were just
Yeah.
marveled by it, like, you
Yeah, there's a lot of reports of people in mania being like as strong as an
oh
ox.
yeah, I've had when I was first institutionalized, and I remember being sick to death of wearing these, you know, house coats basically. I wanted regular street clothes with the other ones who've been there for a longer duration than I. And I recall going into the laundry room and changing and coming out and feeling like a new man. Like, oh fuck, I blend with the rest of them. And of course, the orderly, they're like, no, can't do that, Matt. Get back in your gown. I'm like, oh my god, I'm not doing it. They said, well, go to your room. And I was very defiant and belligerent on that idea. So they called up two security guards. And I remember them rushing into my room. Uh, Two of them, one on each arm, were trying to hold me down on the bed, and I threw them back. And they're big boys. I was sitting at
Mm.
maybe 125 pounds, as homeless at that point, starving. And didn't have a whole lot of muscle mass at all at that point, but I remember slinging them off and then capturing me again, smashed my head off the headboard, cut my forehead, and still wrestling with them. And they had, all they could do to keep me restrained, and then finally injected a needle in my ass, and I felt the same way. Rape, like, what the fuck are you guys doing to me? And for 4 or 5 days, I was just out, crawling on the floor. It's pathetic. Yeah. So I didn't mean to get derailed on the holotropic breathing.
No problem, no problem.
Tends to happen. Yeah. But,
oh, well, maybe you can edit this part out, but, yeah, and so that, I was using meditation and talk therapy as well on the retreats, but I came to realize over a few sessions that it was really the breath work that people were noticing the progress with. Moni was noticing progress on a day-to-day basis. I mean, every day. Big issues would come up with her. And so that's how it went for 6 years. And then my intuition took me in another direction. I felt more like I wanted to work in Brazil. And I hooked up with a couple of friends of mine who are also graph facilitators who own a hotel. Started doing retreats here too. But the whole thing felt a little bit, it was very successful, but the whole thing felt a little bit limited because the retreats were expensive, somewhere between $700 and $1,000 a day before,
wow.
How we set it up, because it's a private retreat, right?
Right.
And even if I wasn't making much more than minimum wage, it still was coming out expensive. And so I noticed that there were some certain spiritual therapies that I'd had experience with where they seemed to be accessing people's souls, and I participated in that. So I started to wonder if what I was doing with people in breathwork, I could do at a distance. Because during the breathwork process, I recognized that I was absorbing the energies of the clients as well, and that it often seemed like I was taking on more of the heavy and difficult energies than my client was going through, and that became a regular part of my retreats, is that I would do breath work for the client after they had done it for themselves, which was a huge step, and it's something my trainer still doesn't agree with, but I know what I was feeling, and the results of the retreats got better. The results of the retreats improved. Things got more powerful,
Wow.
And then I started to experiment with that in 2019 at a distance, seeing if I could do breath work from my own apartment here in Sao Paulo, Brazil. And I started working with clients in Jakarta and London and Finland and Florida, all over the place. And I was getting similar results as I was on the retreats in terms of the kind of material that I was processing for people.
Right.
So just before our interview, I was working with a woman from London, in a 2-hour session, and that's kind of what I do now, at least during the virus. When the virus is over, I think I'll still go back to doing retreats, in addition to what I'm doing now with the distance work, because the distance work seems to be great value for people.
Oh, it would, definitely. Now you can reach a bigger audience that way too. Now,
yeah, you help more people.
Well, that's it. That's key here. With the holotropic breathing technique, though, well, you're doing the breathing with your clients. Did you find that must have de-energized you to death? Because, buddy, I can tell you, even in conversation, being an empath, I absorb all kinds of energies, and if I don't ground myself and protect myself, I absorb those in such a negative manner, it can put me out of commission for 2 and 3 days, right?
Yeah, well, what happened was when the client was breathing, now everything is being done by this healing field, right? Stan Grof calls it the inner healer, but it's more like a field. And when the client was doing their breath work, I would regularly start to feel very sleepy during their session. And, 9 a.m., okay, we're up, we're ready to go. And then at 9:30, I'm falling asleep. I'm fighting to stay awake. And then I would be moody. And I would have nightmares related to the client's content. If they were working through sadness, I would be crying in my sleep, these kind of things.
Right.
Never really cried in my sleep, but I would have very sad nightmares, just to give you the idea. And And I eventually saw that it wasn't just me, but there was a number of people on retreat when the setting was right, that the healing field would send energies to other people who were prepared to take on the energies, and that this was helping the client tremendously.
Nice. Yeah, kind of taking their
Yeah,
baggage from them, right? You know?
yeah,
Because
yeah.
from my understanding and research, we're born with up to 14 generations worth of baggage from our ancestors. You know, whether that's true or not, I'm sure there's several generations worth of baggage that we're walking around
Is
with.
that a Five Nations thing?
I don't know. I can't remember where I read it now. That's it. You know, I take everything for face value for the moment. I
Okay.
extract and discard
I think
depending
that was
on
a
how it serves.
tribal belief from a
Yeah,
native, like
might have been, right?
Algonquin Indians or Five Nations or something like
Okay.
that. But yeah,
Yeah. Well, I'd almost still be on board simply because the indigenous people have had things worked out to a systematic way of living far superior to than what we have as developed individuals, or so we think. You know, I firmly believe that, and um, yeah, I'm not 100% where I got those. There's an article I read somewhere online, maybe. Can't remember. I can't source it, but regardless, yes.
yeah. Well, I mean, I don't necessarily see it that way. I think we are evolving, and I know it's very common for people to think that tribes were living in perfect harmony with nature and things like this, and that's true.
Hmm.
I mean, they certainly were had a better environmental situation. But if you've looked at the anthropology on, for example, cannibalism,
Oh yeah. Okay.
um, there was some certain things going on, even in Canada, which would blow our modern minds, and not in a good way. We would be mortified, to know some of the, what went on at the tribal level in Latin America, in South America. It's common knowledge in Brazil that all the native tribes were cannibals,
Right.
So I think that I have a lot of respect for our ancestors. I'm not denying anything, but I also like to see cultures as they were really, and what they needed to do to survive at that time,
Makes
you
sense.
know, and the fact that there was a guy from an anthropologist who went to visit cannibals in New Guinea, and people had asked him, they said, well, are you going to teach them to stop being cannibals, to stop eating people? And he said, no. And they said, why not? And he said, these people have lived like this for thousands of years, and it's about to be gone, you know? So even when it comes to murdering and eating people in your own family, there's a certain respect we need to give for people's cultures,
That's it. Right. You know,
and
it
even if it's like that.
yeah, it seems to be more or less. Um, there's no right or wrong in any aspect of anything in the world. It's just the perception from that projected individual's mindset. Now that sounds pretty benign and bizarre, but at the same time, you think about, as you mentioned, cannibalism to our standard way of living now. But even in
By
different
the way,
cultures
that's
of the
my
world.
favorite topic. Cannibalism is my favorite topic, just so you know.
Yeah, right, right on.
Okay. Yeah. Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
culture differences around the world is, you know, mind-boggling. We have pets here that are dogs and cats. In other places, they're eating them, as a delicacy,
Sure.
and that's the norm. So again,
Hmm.
it really comes down to perception. But what I meant in regards to the indigenous ones was they just knew how to live off land, appreciate and respect it. Whereas I'm not
Sure.
saying all white people or just a race. It's just the majority of society today in the living standards we live seem to have forgotten,
Sure.
the value behind that, right? And it's
Absolutely.
unfortunate. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, and I think we can learn from all cultures.
I think so
We
too.
could, there's something to be learned with all cultures. And I think more and more people are getting that. There's more people interested in ecology and
Yeah.
this kind of thing. When I go to Europe, everybody wants to talk to me about organic farming. I'm
Yeah,
like,
I hear a lot of
I'm
it too here,
dude,
right?
dude, I grew up on the Jetsons. I don't want to have anything to do with your organic farming.
Yeah,
You just send it to me. Send me the food when you're done, okay?
that's right.
But just leave me on the sidelines for that.
Well, that's it too. my idea, I mean, it's a misconception with that too. Like, I've tried to eat majorly organic, but then I'm thinking, there's glyphosate sprayed on everything anyways. So when these grass-fed animals are eating, you know, the grass that's been sprayed with all kinds of shit anyway, right? And on the topic of veganism, the soil's been, you know, nil for so long. There's not a lot of nutrients left. So what are you really gaining? Again, it's preference to the individual, right? But I think it's
Yeah, I
also,
guess so.
yeah, the intent behind what you're trying to do. So I
Yeah.
bless the food that comes into my body along with water and stuff too to purify it, right? You know, so
And it sounds like this turmeric drink you
turmeric, yeah.
turmeric has done wonders for you. I want to look that up.
Well, yeah, I'll send a link to you as well, and also put that in the description below to the actual video. But as I mentioned, I put the black pepper to add effectiveness to the longevity of the turmeric in the body. Otherwise, it just gets filtered out and doesn't attach and bind as it should.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll take a look at it. I'm usually skeptical about diet solutions to disorders,
Same.
but I'm interested in hearing
Yeah.
learning about this.
Well, the main reason I started that, aside from mentioning the video, was I've been diagnosed also with scoliosis. I got one leg shorter than the other. This isn't to victimize myself. These are just facts tossed by the docs. And something called ankylosing spondylitis, which is calcification of the body, the skeleton over time. Your bones become very rigid. And I suffered tremendously with that going back 6, 7 years ago. Was on a medication called Humira, which you inject with a pen in your stomach every 7, 10 days. And it made me sicker. My inflammation markers were through the roof. So when I started properly recalibrating my diet and realizing what I had to exclude, what I had to increase in terms of benefits to reduce inflammation, it was just a big 180. And specifically with that turmeric drink. I preach that to all kinds of people. I would stop people in conversation on the streets about it. I've even had people holding up a liquor store when I used to drink. He's like, wait a minute, let me write this down. I'm like, buddy, man, you got a line of us here, man. You're going to piss people off, and I'm going to be the one taking the brunt of this. And he's like, no, I don't care, because he had his arm done up in a bandage, right? And I mentioned he suffered from arthritic issues for so long.
So you meant holding up the line at a liquor store?
Yeah, right.
I thought you meant you were giving these dietary recommendations during a holdup at a liquor store. Like, you're giving the criminals these dietary recommendations.
This is another reason why my naturopath mentioned that start that platform, get that out there, because that is just gold to a lot of people. So first,
sure,
the first thing we want to go to usually is a doctor for something of that nature. Like, oh my God, I'm riddled with arthritis. I can barely get out of bed. What can I do? But a lot of people don't want to take it from a simple individual who isn't, classified as a doctor, doesn't have any proper training in that field, right? You don't have a diploma. So it's just, well, my idea is anything that's free isn't usually valued unless it comes with a sticker price, right? But I'm living proof. The doctors have just marveled with my health. I broke my ankle back in July, this last July, and a doctor that seen me before I was, on the recoup path here said, Matt, you look awesome. What are you doing? He sent me to a place in Fall River here in Nova Scotia for chemical sensitivities, because I was suffering from that too. Like, the body was just so under siege with everything, it just couldn't manage, barely keep it afloat. And those ones at the facility also said, wow, you're doing everything you need to, Matt. I'm sorry to tell you, but there's nothing that we can offer you. Most participants that come into this health center usually don't get to that. They continuously suffer while trying to find answers. So pretty much preach, right? Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. So
We should probably wrap it up, huh?
yeah, I think it's creeping into over an hour here, isn't it? So,
Yeah.
all right.
Yeah.
Without further ado, Sean, where can people find you? And is there anything you'd like to finalize in our discussion before we sign off?
Okay, yeah, I could finish with one thing, and that is, I've been at this for 13 years. My own experience was in 96. I'm still of the feeling that if a person has the courage and determination, that they can heal, and some people like yourself have just to take it upon themselves to try and do different things. Some people have been very, very inspired by my bipolar waking up videos
Very
and
much.
and been able to go off meds for 10 years. I've got a few people who've been in touch with me recently who were inspired by my work, and then a decade later they haven't had an episode. And then others have sought me out. They've needed more help. But I think that if the determination and the courage to go into the pain is there, that really healing is just a matter of time, and it comes slowly. It comes in stages,
Yep.
but you can see the difference. I've got one guy I'm working with tomorrow. I've been working with him for 5 years. And he's just in a much better place now than he was back then.
Well, that's
But
it.
he's still got a ways to go, right?
Yep. Well, I mean, it's gradual depending on the individual and what they've had to endure
Yeah,
coming to that point naturally.
yeah.
Everyone's a different case too. So, but that's
I,
decent. And
yeah,
I might have to hone in on that and talk to you, in depth on that another time, and
sure.
maybe take
And
up
everybody
one
needs
of
to
your
heal.
programs. Well, yeah, we certainly do.
Everybody needs to heal. I need to heal. I've still got healing. I had a deep healing process for myself just last weekend here at the
Nice.
house,
Yep.
using other processes. But healing needs to happen for everybody.
It does.
Donald Trump needs to heal.
Oh
Joe
my
Biden
God,
needs to heal.
yeah.
Justin Trudeau needs to heal.
Yeah, he
We've
does. Right.
all need to heal.
Yeah,
So
that's right.
I
Perfect,
think
man.
that's my message these days is heal.
I think it is too. And,
Yeah, yeah.
sharing is caring. And when someone endures something, it's best to get your story out there, speak your truth so that you can, help others along the way, right? So,
Sure, yeah, yeah. Oh, and I guess for anyone who's interested in my work, my YouTube channel is Bipolar or Waking Up. It's all one word. Or you could Google Bipolar Spiritual. And my website is bipolarawakenings.com. I changed the name from Bipolar Waking Up in about 5 years ago because I realized it wasn't a question anymore. I knew that people with bipolar disorder had the potential for a kind of awakening through healing. So that's
nice.
why I changed the name Bipolar Awakenings. And I've been doing that ever since. And it's been a real adventure, I'll tell you
Very good.
that, and very
Very good.
rewarding. Yeah, yeah.
Awesome. Well, thanks again, Sean. It was a definite, precious platform for you to come on and be a guest today. Like I highly appreciate your time and energy that
Thanks
you.
for having me.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks, Sean. All right. I'm sure we'll be in touch. And as I mentioned, I'll put everything on the YouTube video with the description below to all the links that you've just tossed out there to the audience, right?
Okay, great.
All right. Awesome. Have a good one, Sean.
Thanks.
Thanks, buddy.
All right.
Take care.
Okay, take care.
Bye-bye.